It's Fantasy Football Marathon here at NBC Sports. Obviously, I'm announcing Ride or Die. We'll obviously do another episode of Fantasy Football Happy Hour, but tomorrow, Love Hate Day. Tomorrow is the Love Hate Day. A lot going on.
Matthew, you know,
this assumes if I write it, but yes, between now and then,
plenty of time.
I got oodles of time.
Fantasy Football Happy Hour with Matthew Berry, served by Applebee's.
Welcome to the Fantasy Football Happy Hour. It's our first love-hate day of the season. More importantly, it's the reveal day. The 2024 Ride or Die Matthew will announce today.
What could possibly go wrong? It is Royce Freeman. Damn it. We talked about this in the pre-show meetings. Don't blow it. Don't blow it. Todd Collins.
We'll see if the love list gives us a hint.
Yeah.
But a loaded day, guys.
Well, everyone that was even in consideration is on the love list, obviously.
The runner-ups.
I'm nervous. I have to be honest with you. I'm completely nervous about my Ride or Die. You know, I literally just saw my friends here at Roto World, you know, God bless them. They just put out a graphic. Literally said, Matthew Berry's Ride or Die track record since he's joined NBC has been phenomenal. Last year, Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver 3, right? And then the year before, Jalen Hurts finished as QB1. Both guys were going, you know, Amon-Ra was like going as wide receiver 12 or 13. I think Hurts was going as QB8. So I'm nervous.
Yeah.
I'm nervous. A lot to live up to.
You set a high bar.
By the way, and Austin Eckler, the year before my last year at ESPN, Austin Eckler was like end of the second round, finishes RB2.
Yeah.
He was going as like running back 12 or something like that.
I can tell you've agonized over it because you sound like McNulty in The Wire.
Dude, I have like a nice McNulty reference. By the way, can we just talk for 1 second that McNulty's the worst character?
No, he's not. He's fine.
He's not the worst character, but he
He's
kind of
the
becomes
least
irrelevant
interesting.
over time.
You think when you start The Wire, you're like, oh, it's going to be all about
Yes.
McNulty. And then you're like, snooze fest. And then you're like, yeah, give me literally anyone else.
That's fair.
Yeah.
It's like a game manager quarterback.
I think it's the hottest take.
But by the way, whatever happened to McNulty? Like so many people from The Wire went on to do stuff, and I feel like that guy.
That's fair.
He's not an amazing actor. He's British or something, I think.
He was anyway, whatever. Yeah, I mean, I do like whatever. I was up all night writing Love Hate. It'll be out by the time you watch this, it'll be out 10,000 words this year, guys. It's long. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
A lot going on.
A lot more words than seconds of sleep.
Oh, dude, obviously. I might fall asleep halfway through this show.
Well, just make it to the reveal. That's literally all we need
All we
right
care
now.
about.
Let's jump into Love Hate. Of course, we start with the running backs, and the king starts us off on the love list for running backs. Derrick Henry, Matthew, for you, RB7.
I don't understand the anti-argument for Derrick Henry. I guess it's injury, right? It's injury, but on the other hand, like, he's not human. You, me, Jay, we all have DNA. I don't know what's in Derrick Henry, but it's not the same stuff we're made of. 68 rushing touchdowns in his last 72 games. He now goes to Baltimore. It's going to be the best offensive line he's played with in his career. Since Lamar became the starter in 2019, Baltimore running backs average 4.8 yards per carry. That is the highest in the NFL. Like, just the threat of Lamar just opens up so many lanes. You think about last year when you had Gus Edwards, Keaton Mitchell, the ghost of Melvin Gordon, Justice Hill, like all players that are not nearly as good as Derrick Henry, and they combined for 20 rushing touchdowns and almost 1,700 rushing yards. I'm not saying they all go to Derrick Henry because Hill and Mitchell are still there, and you know at some point Mitchell will come back. But whatever. If I told you Derrick Henry's getting 1,500 yards and 15 touchdowns, you're telling me you're not signing up for that? Of course you are. Stop it. King Henry monster, you're coming.
Yeah, I think that the concern with Henry would be, 1, age, 2, again, last year was among the league leaders in carries, and just is he going to ever deal with that attrition? And the other thing, the big weakness of the Ravens, or at least the big question mark, is the offensive line, which has a lot of question marks in a way it didn't last year.
Three
At the same
jobs
time,
up for grabs.
Yeah, let's just see him fail. Let's see Derrick Henry fail first, because he succeeds every year. He exceeds expectations every year.
I'll just argue this. Even with the 3 question marks at the Baltimore Ravens offensive line, last year the Titans had the worst offensive line in football. Like, and I don't think it was particularly close.
I trust the Ravens to figure that out.
Yeah, 1, you trust them to figure it out, and then 2, for Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, that nullifies.
The threat of Lamar solves a lot of offensive line issues. Anyway.
Our next one, Isiah Pacheco. Jay, he comes in as RB8 for Matthew. This is a good offense and a offense where it's pretty clearly defined how narrow the running back volume is in this offense.
Yeah, so he doesn't have any competition. He's clearly trusted in that organization. Isiah Pacheco had 81 carries in 4 playoff games. They clearly want to ride him where they can. And then the other thing is that I think the Chiefs are just going to be a lot better than last year, which is weird to say because they won the Super Bowl, but the offense was stuck in mud for a lot of last season. They're projected to win 12 games. The over-under on DraftKings is 11.5, slightly back to the over. Just think this team is going to be in scoring position a lot. Pacheco he gets all the red zone usage basically out of running backs. Jerick McKinnon is a free agent right now. Pacheco is set for a monster season and also contributes in the passing game.
Yeah, he does. 40 receptions last year. He was one of 11 running backs with at least 200 rushes and over 40 receptions. You mentioned no McKinnon there. 7 games last year without McKinnon, including the playoffs. 19.9 fantasy points per game, over 21 touches a game. He had 18 or more fantasy points in 5 of 7 games. That 19.9 would have been a top 4 fantasy running back over the course of a full season. We agree he's going to be the lead running back for Andy Reid on one of, if not the best offense in football. He's on the short list for ride or die. I'll just tell you that right now. He is on the short list for ride or die. Monster season coming from Isiah Pacheco. I'm at running back 8. He's going at running back 9, but I've also seen him going outside the top 10. His ADP's been rising the last couple of weeks, but as kind of the heat has been rising on Pacheco, but he's an RB1 and he's not being drafted this way.
And we move outside the top 10 for running backs. Joe Mixon comes in as RB12 for you, Matthew, a guy that was kind of thought of as uninspiring at times for the Bengals, but got so much work. Now goes to the Texans, where he will continue to get so much work.
Yeah, I think people think that the Texans offense was much more pass-heavy last year than they were. They were actually much more balanced. The Texans were actually top 12 in the NFL last year in yards per game and running back carries last season. Devin Singletary just got a ton of work down the stretch. And whatever you think of Joe Mixon, he's better than Devin Singletary. And so, Joe Mixon, with not a lot of competition in that backfield, Dameon Pierce, Dario Ogunbowale, this is a guy that last year, again, one of only 5 running backs with 250 rushes and 50 receptions. If you're a defensive coordinator facing the Texans, what am I going to do? Am I going to play, too deep and try to solve for Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, and Tank Dell? Or am I going to load the box and stop Joe Mixon? He's going to see a really easy box a lot of the time.
And Jay, this is obviously an offense that there's going to be a lot of opportunity at the goal line, and hasn't been a great preseason for Dameon Pierce, coming off of a season that was really disappointing as well. Yeah,
he's a very unsexy pick, Joe Mixon, but he just produces in spades. And I think that in this offense, even though he loses Joe Burrow in that offense, the Bengals' offensive line was never magnificent. Still think there's upside for Mixon. Again, not someone you're super excited about, but is bound to produce.
He's one of those guys that when you draft him, no one in your league is gonna when you draft Malik Nabers in your draft this year, people go ooh,
or they get pissed at the Giants fans.
That was my guy.
Yeah, that's my guy.
Yeah. No one's gonna be like, damn it, you took Joe Mixon from me, or like, ooh, Joe Mixon. But then you're going to look up and he's going to get 20 touches every game, and he's in the 4th round, which is where he's going on Yahoo, like just massive volume.
It's especially like running back Michael Pittman.
Exactly. If you go receiver early, like Mixon is a very strong RB2 this year.
Right after him at RB13 for Matthew is James Cook. And Jay, since Joe Brady took over this offense, we saw a totally different James Cook.
Yeah, he was a monster in the second half of the year. They became more run heavy. It's not like they added a ton in terms of pass catching options. Think back to, if you want to think about James Cook's ceiling, think about the Dallas game where he had 25 carries, 179 yards on the ground. Then he gives you work in the passing game as well. Do you think there's a concern, though, Connor, about Ray Davis and him cutting into Cook's work at all?
I don't think so. I think it's good that Ray Davis looks good, and he was a very effective college back in case Cook gets hurt. But they drafted Cook in the 2nd round. He's supposed to be the guy in the pass game and in the run game, and he's just more explosive. Yep. Ray Davis is I call him the Honda Civic when he was coming out of the draft. You love the reliability, but nothing is sexy about it. James Cook, we know he has the big playability.
Yeah, and you mentioned, when Joe Brady took over, Jay. Once he took over, the Bills were 2nd in running back carries per game. Joe Brady went run heavy, and I think they're going to do the same thing. And so if Ray Davis takes a little bit of work off of Cook to keep him healthy, great, no problem. But Ray Davis, to me, is more of a threat to Ty Johnson than he is to James Cook, who's going to be the focal point of the run offense in Buffalo. Again, one of the better offenses in football.
We move to one of the most overlooked running backs in fantasy year after year, and that's James Conner. Matthew, for you have him as RB18 on Yahoo ADP right now, going as RB20. And right now, Matthew, when you look at the previous years, All 3 years in Arizona, points per game, James Conner has finished in the top 15. All 3 years.
Again, similar to Joe Mixon, it's just cheap volume. He's not sexy. No one's going to be upset when you draft him, but each of the last 3 seasons, he's one of only 4 running backs. Literally one of only 4 running backs in the NFL with at least 1,000 yards from scrimmage and 8 touchdowns or more each of the past 3 years. Just the consistency, I think this offense is a lot better with the addition of Michael Wilson, a full year of Kyler Murray, the emergence of Trey McBride. I like Michael Wilson, the human Dortch, Greg Dortch. I actually think this offense is underrated. And so James Conner, who should be in scoring position often, 3 down back, just cheap volume going way too late.
Some others receiving votes: Alvin Kamara, RB16, Najee Harris, RB21, Jalen Warren, RB25, Brian Robinson, RB26, Tony Pollard, RB28, Chase Brown, RB29, Tyjae Spears, RB32, Jonathan Brooks, RB34, Ezekiel Elliott, RB36, and his teammate Rico Dowdle, RB40. Jay, who on this list stands out to you, and you cannot say Najee Harris at RB21?
I won't say Najee Harris. I'll say Tony Pollard, who I think might be back based on what he's shown in the preseason, the explosiveness of a few of his runs, and the fact that he was trending up towards the end of last season. I just think it makes sense, the fact that he came back 9 months after breaking his leg. It would make sense that he would need a full year to be back, and everyone thinks that is definitely going to be a 50-50 split. It probably is. There are also worlds where Tony Pollard, who came into last year as like a first-round fantasy pick and a monster, there are worlds where he has that type of season this year if he shows that explosiveness.
All those guys have a lot in common, which is like they're either like it's just cheap volume that you can get late in your draft, like Alvin Kamara. There's just no one there. Jonathan Brooks. Yes, he'll miss a couple of weeks, but Dave Canales, when he was with the Buccaneers, top 10 in running back receiving yards. Brooks. But the one guy I want to shout out real quickly, Brian Robinson. Again, you talk about James Conner. When Cliff Kingsbury was in Arizona, Kenyon Drake, of all people, was second in the NFL in goal-to-go rushing attempts. James Conner was always top 3 in the NFL in goal-to-go rushing attempts. When they're getting close, Cliff likes to run the ball, and it's going to be with Brian Robinson, not Austin Eckler. Eckler's going to be the Chase Edmonds of that offense. Brian Robinson's scoring 12 touchdowns this year. Mark my words.
All right, let's move over to the hate list here. We start with Rachaad White, Jay. He comes in for RB15 for Matthew. But we've said this before. Dave Canales off to Carolina. Rachaad White, purely a volume merchant last year at a nearly unsustainable rate.
Yeah, and specifically a PPR merchant, given that he was under 4 yards per carry. And I think he will suffer without Canales. Canales, I think, to a fault, in a similar vein to Bobby Slowick last year, where they just seemed so intent on establishing the run for the sake of establishing the run. Maybe that had some positive ripple effects in the passing game, but for Rachaad White's purposes, if his volume decreases at all, then he's in big trouble because it doesn't seem like he has efficiency in him in this offense.
Yeah, and Canales was so dedicated to the run, to establishing it. You just don't know if they're going to continue with that kind of workload when it wasn't super efficient, right? No team had fewer rush yards in the NFL last year than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And oh, by the way, Bucky Irving is having a really nice camp as well. So if Bucky Irving takes any of the work from Rachaad White, they really didn't have anything last year, but feels like they're confident about Bucky Irving. So
he can catch the ball, right? And you need Rachaad White to catch the ball if you're drafting him. By the way, Yahoo ADP inside the top 40. It's around 38 right now. That means he needs all the volume in the pass game as well to be effective. And I think Bucky Irving might have been drafted to take over that role, especially with maybe being a little bit more explosive.
When you look at some of the guys that are going behind Rachaad White, it's not that I think he's bad. He's going too high for me. I'm worried that there's going to be some regression.
I'd much rather have James Conner just straight up, and he's going after him.
Our next guy, Rhamondre Stevenson, he comes in outside your top 20 running backs, Matthew, RB22, for an offense that it's going to be a struggle for New England right now as they kind of turn the page.
So career lows last year in yards per carry, yards per target, catch rate in 2023. Again, sort of the same thing with Rachaad White, right? If Rhamondre Stevenson isn't catching passes, that's a big hit to his fantasy value. And what do the Patriots do in this offseason? They signed Antonio Gibson, who's a pretty good pass-catching running back as well. So this is, each of the past 3 seasons, Antonio Gibson had a double-digit target share. So if Rhamondre Stevenson even gets, call it 3 less targets a game, that's significant to his fantasy value, because remember, 45% of Stevenson's fantasy value over the last 2 seasons, his fantasy points, 45% of his fantasy points have come as receivers. So the fact that it's not a good offense and the presence of Gibson makes me nervous.
DeAndre Swift next up on the hate list, 84th overall for you, Matthew, RB24. Yahoo ADP inside the top 75, Jay. A little bit of a confusing backfield. The Bears gave him big money, but can you count on Swift?
I don't think so. One of my favorite season-long bets on DraftKings is DeAndre Swift under 750.5 rushing yards. He's only top 617 once in his career, and that's largely because he's been hurt, but he always gets hurt, basically, outside of last season. I just think between Khalil Herbert, Roschon Johnson, the fact that it's crowded, they've just a ton of mouths in that offense to feed, and between that and health issues, I wouldn't want to buy Swift at price.
Oh, and by the way, not just the crowded backfield, but a crowded passing. Like part of Swift's value is his role in the passing game. But when we have Caleb Williams, and you can there's DJ Moore, there's Keenan Allen, there's Rome Odunze. Oh, I got 2 good tight ends. I don't know. He makes me super nervous as well. 3 different running backs for the Bears last year saw at least 110 touches. 3 different ones. And I get it. They gave him a lot of money, but it's not like Herbert and Johnson are bad.
No.
They're not. So.
Right. And the investment wasn't. The guarantees just don't roll over with running back contracts like they do at other positions. So a quick mention here. We talked a lot.
How many touchdowns do you think DeAndre Swift gets? You know what I mean? That's the other thing. It's just he's not going to be their goal line.
Caleb Williams will steal a few too.
Yeah.
He will steal a few. A quick mention here. We talked a lot earlier this week about Zamir White. It's just a difference of value. Matthew, you have him 91st overall, RB27. His Yahoo ADP right now is 70.6, playing deep into the preseason game. So Zamir White makes the hate list. But we'll move to wide receivers. A little love for the pass catchers here. And, of course, we start with somebody that we've kicked around as a top 3 pick in Justin Jefferson here, Jay, who at times you said you might consider taking him 1st or 2nd overall.
Yeah, I think McCarthy going down hurts a little bit just because you're 1 snap away from Nick Mullins or Jaron Hall, which isn't ideal. But at the same time, Sam Darnold can stay healthy. I think Darnold will do enough to just get Jefferson the ball. We forget that Justin Jefferson 2 years ago, Offensive Player of the Year. The year before that, absolutely elite again and an amazing rookie season too. I just think that Jefferson is the most talented wide receiver in the game when you consider the risks with Tyreek Hill's age. And I think that it's perhaps been a little bit forgotten because of the time that he missed last season. When, by the way, last season, per game, he was an absolute monster again.
By the way, not just the Hill age, but also the fact that CeeDee Lamb and Jamar Chase are not currently in camp, right? And there's, when you miss practice time, even if they are back in time for the season, there's concern of injury there as well. You mentioned Nick Mullins. Dude, in the 4 games with Nick Mullins last year, 22.1 fantasy points per game. Vikings fans don't want to see Nick Mullins, but for Justin Jefferson purposes, it'd be fine. He's on the love list not because he's obviously a first rounder, but I'm as a top 5 player. I think you can talk about him as a top 4 overall player, and I've seen him go I've got 7, 8, 9 on a lot of different drafts. So he's on the love list because of where he's going in the first round, where a difference between 3 or 4 overall versus 7, 8, or 9 overall is a massive difference.
Drake London also makes the love list. We also talked about him a lot this week as a big breakout candidate. Real quickly, Matthew, is he on the ride or die short list right now?
He's on the ride or die short list as well. We've talked about what Zach Robinson, the new offensive coordinator of the Falcons, can do on the Rams staff from 2019 to 2013. Rams 2nd in wide receiver target share and 4th in wide receiver fantasy points with Zach Robinson on their staff. Kirk Cousins has supported a top 10 wide receiver 5 of 6 seasons at Minnesota. He finds a guy, he locks into him. And so Drake London, who went ahead, he was drafted ahead of guys like Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, guys that we think are really talented. And no one at the time was like really, Drake London? Right. This is somebody that just, because of the play calling of Arthur Smith and the quarterback play of Mariota, Ritter, Heineke, just hasn't been able to get the ball consistently. With Zach Robinson calling the plays and Kirk Cousins throwing the ball, or even Michael Penix, he will get the looks.
Your man Cooper Kupp on the love list, Jay. Wide receiver 18 for Matthew. A Yahoo ADP right now right around 35. Once upon a time a fantasy legend. It's been a good summer for Cooper Kupp.
It has, by all accounts. He's fully healthy. And here's the thing with Kupp. So the last 10 games of the season for Puka Nacua last year, you know how many times Puka had more than 5 receptions in a game? Once in the final 10 games. In the final 10 games, he only saw double-digit targets once as well. Kupp had the same target share on the field when Puka was also on the field. And that was with Kupp dealing with the hamstring injury early in the season. He dealt with a badly sprained ankle. I think there's a very real chance that Cooper Kupp just has a better season, full stop, this year than Puka Nacua, and he ends up as being worth a second-round pick, certainly.
And that's honestly the point, right? Is that straight up, you can easily make an argument for Cooper Kupp over Puka Nacua, straight up. But it's not going to cost. Kupp's going 2 to 3 rounds after Nacua.
Yeah. Right after Kupp is Malik Nabers, wide receiver 19. We said it earlier in the week. The Giants didn't have a single player see 80-plus targets last year, Matthew. That is going to change with Malik Nabers in town.
Malik Nabers is one of these guys, hey, Daniel Jones, just get it somewhere within the zip code of Malik Nabers, and he's coming down with it. He's just a special player. We've talked about this, Connor. I think in any year where Marvin Harrison wasn't drafted, he'd have been your number one wide receiver.
Right, absolutely, and a lot of teams would have taken him over Marvin Harrison Jr. It's just the way the draft shakes out that Arizona liked him. Different players, both spectacular. Nabers is so explosive. Brian Dable is going to know how to use this guy inside, outside. The manufactured touchers will be there too if you need any more confidence in the situation.
Since 2018, all 5 wide receivers drafted inside the top 10 overall in the NFL draft saw at least 100 targets in the rookie season, including Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, Garrett Wilson. They all finished as top 24 wide receivers. Monster year coming for Malik Nabers.
We move on to Rashee Rice at wide receiver.
Also on the short list for Ride or Die.
Ooh, rookie making the cut. We'll see how that shakes out in just a minute. Rashee Rice, wide receiver 25, Jay. You said this perfectly the other day. This is Patrick Mahomes' number 1 wide receiver.
Yep, and just the rapport between the two of them clearly grew over the course of the season. I feel like Rashee Rice is a rookie. Like, this is year 2. He's going to get better. He's going to take a leap. The final 10 games of the year for the Chiefs, when you include the playoffs, Rashee Rice had 8+ targets in 8 of those games. And I just think that if you're getting 8 targets consistently from Patrick Mahomes, then you have huge top 10, top 12 wide receiver upside. When you combine that with the expected skill development, the fact that this offense is just going to be better overall, I think there are real worlds where Rashee Rice ends as a top 10 wide receiver.
22 red zone targets last year, 7th among wide receivers. He had multiple red zone targets in 4 of his final games, talking about that, how that ended the season. I talked to Andy Reid at the Combine, and I asked him specifically about Rashee Rice, and he said once it clicked in for him, once Rashee Rice learned to go inside and basically learn the same routes as Travis Kelce, that unlocked everything because they started out him outside. And so just now teams don't know what to do because Rice and Kelce sometimes would literally run the same route. So I'm not worried about the suspension. Just it's in the back of your mind, but I think there's a chance that he doesn't get suspended until next year, if that even happens.
We look at 2 tight ends here. Trey McBride comes in as tight end 3, and Jay, this was just a huge year for Trey McBride. And he didn't have Kyler Murray the whole year. You would think with Kyler Murray back, ready to roll, that McBride should only get even better in this offense.
Yeah, I think this is going to be one of the most fantasy-friendly environments in terms of an offense, just between the fact that expecting that the Cardinals, whose win total is around 7, the 6.5 to 7.5 range, that they're going to be throwing a ton. It was an offense that is explosive, and it's an offense that is just clearly going to be geared towards Marvin Harrison and then Trey McBride. And so there's going to be a lot of targets up for grabs, and McBride has got that rapport with Murray.
There's a scenario where he's the number 1 tight end in fantasy a year from now, right? That is well within the range of outcomes. Every game he played with Kyler Murray last year, at least a 20% target share.
How about Jake Ferguson, Matthew? He's the other tight end on the love list here at tight end 8.
Yeah, I mean, again, you just none of this is that tough. You're just sort of looking at situations where players are going to get a lot of looks and they're talented. Jake Ferguson, other than CeeDee Lamb, who, by the way, again, there's contract issues there. There's not much else for Dak Prescott, who is going to be one of the pass-heaviest quarterbacks in the NFL. No tight end had more red zone targets than Jake Ferguson last year. Top 3 in the NFL in routes run at the position. Top 4 in most slot targets among tight ends as well. And so saw over 100 targets last year, kind of a breakout year for him. They didn't add anything to the pass catchers. Forget the position, just pass catchers. The running back room isn't kind of bare as well. Like, we think Dallas is going to have one of the best offenses in the NFL, and it's going to be CeeDee Lamb, my guy Aites, and Jake Ferguson. And at the moment, it might just be Jake Ferguson.
It could very well be.
Like, who knows?
The Fresh Prince meme, just him standing around the room empty.
1,000%. But he's going late. It's like a late round. Sorry, he's going towards the end of the top 10 among tight ends, and he could easily be a top 5 fantasy tight end. Sorry.
Let's look at the other pass catchers receiving votes. Tank Dell, wide receiver 26. Christian Kirk, a floor target, wide receiver 30. Deontay Johnson, wide receiver 35. Xavier Worthy, wide receiver 38. DeAndre Hopkins, wide receiver 39. Jamison Williams, wide receiver 46. Josh Palmer could be the number 1 wide receiver for Justin Herbert at wide receiver 51. Pat Freiermuth at tight end 13. Denny Carter's ride or die suggestion, Taysom Hill at tight end 18. Noah Fant at tight end 20. Jay, what stands out to you on this list?
You mentioned him, Josh Palmer. I just think the fact there's a general rule in life when the guy who's favored to be Justin Herbert's number 1 wide receiver, he has to be taken in the top 50 wide receivers in fantasy. I just think there's this idea that they're just never going to throw the ball in LA. Like, they're going to have to throw the ball at some point. Yeah, and Josh Palmer, I think, is the best candidate to be Herbert's number 1. You can make a case, I guess, for Lad McConkey, but I think the Palmer is the safest bet, and thus he should be going as a top 45 wide receiver at least.
Yeah, I think Bryce Young takes a big step this year. Obviously, the addition of Canales, the better offensive line, the other weapons around it. But they've talked about the fact that Deontay Johnson is going to be the focal point of this offense. Very good wide receiver, and so he's just, I think people have been disappointed by the years in Pittsburgh, but anytime you hear a coach saying, like, yeah, he's the focal point of our offense, give me Deontay Johnson. And DeAndre Hopkins, I'll just say, listen, DeAndre Hopkins is one of my favorite players in the NFL, but only 3 players last year had more deep targets last year than DeAndre Hopkins. Once Will Levis came into the starting lineup, like, he was just chucking it deep to Hop. And I think because he's an older player and, he's banged up, like, people are forgetting about him. But, like, DeAndre Hopkins is going to get deep targets on one of the I think it's going to be one of the pass-heavier teams in the NFL under Will Levis, who has this cannon of an arm. And so the price for DeAndre Hopkins is so cheap. And, like, do you think he has one more good year in him? I do.
Let's go to the hate list for pass catchers. It kicks off with George Pickens coming in at wide receiver 32 for you, Matthew. His Yahoo ADP is being taken as wide receiver 28. Right now, as it stands, this quarterback situation is very, very ugly. And I think the offensive line, I like the young players they've drafted, but it's been a little bit of a struggle in his second camp for Broderick Jones as well. It doesn't make you feel better.
It's the inconsistency that bothers you, right? 30% of his total fantasy points last year came in only 2 games. So there's that. And you think about Drake London. We just talked about how much we love him as a talent. Under Arthur Smith, Drake London never finished as a top 40 wide receiver in points per game. Do we think George Pickens is better than Drake London from a pure NFL skill standpoint? I don't. I think George Pickens is really talented, but do I think he's significantly better than Drake London, that he can overcome the play calling of Arthur Smith and poor quarterback play? Like, Russell Wilson and Justin Fields will be better than Desmond Ridder, but, like, will they be that much better? And that's before you even get to the fact that, like, there's a chance Brandon Ayuk is on this team. So I just, where George Pickens is going, he's going as wide receiver 28 on Yahoo. Like, there's guys going after him that I would much rather have.
Our next guy, Jordan Addison, Jay. There's a big disparity with this one. Matthew has him as wide receiver 48. He's being taken as wide receiver 41. We believe Sam Darnold can support Justin Jefferson, but that cost for Addison is a big price where we're not sure he can support him. Maybe some touchdown regression, too.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of his production obviously came with Justin Jefferson out last season. Also, just some kind of fluky plays. Think back to the touchdown against the Niners in primetime where that really should have been picked at the end of the half. Also, the fact that he scored 10 touchdowns on 15 red zone targets, like, that's not sustainable. Between that, the suspension, again, the 1 snap away from Nick Mullins thing, there's just a lot of uncertainty surrounding Addison. He clearly has a talent. He has upside. I'm not sure you want to really buy in given all this uncertainty.
There's also some chance that he could be suspended for off-the-field issues as well. And, oh, by the way, we just talked about how Justin Jefferson is, quarterback-proof, and when Kirk Cousins went down, like, Justin Jefferson still averaged over 22 fantasy points per game. Well, when Cousins went down, Jordan Addison was wide receiver 43 in points per game. He averaged just 10.5 fantasy points per game in the 9 games following Cousins' injury. And to your point, that was without Justin Jefferson for a good chunk of that. Yep. So I think just a massive regression candidate. He's my wide receiver 48.
Courtland Sutton up next, wide receiver 50 for you, Matthew. He's being taken as the 45th wide receiver on Yahoo. Bo Nix will be under center for this team, a team that could be a little bit run-heavy under Sean Payton, even after drafting Nix.
I like Bo Nix, actually, and I think the Broncos are going to be better than people think. I don't think they're going to be great, but I think they're not going to be a train wreck. Having said that, as much as I like Courtland Sutton from a talent standpoint, and he's made some ridiculous catches over the years, last year, Courtland Sutton scored 10 touchdowns. 10 touchdowns for Courtland Sutton last year, and still only finished as wide receiver 38. So now if you get him down to like 6 or 7 touchdowns, like, it just doesn't feel like he's going to get the volume there, because we expect a little bit more from Marvin Mims. Tim Patrick is back. Right. Like, they've got Greg Dulcich healthy now. Like, I think he's kind of an interesting tight end. So, Courtland Sutton, I'm at wide receiver 50. He's going much higher than that on Yahoo.
Brock Bowers is our first tight end here on the hate list, Jay. Tight end 12 for Matthew, also dealing with a foot injury right now. He hasn't practiced, I believe, in a week. So Bowers looked good when he played, but now with the injury, Michael Mayer is there. Just a lot of question marks around his rookie season.
Yep, injured towards the end of last season as well for Georgia, and I think there are a few issues with Bowers. One, Michael Mayer is still there and on the team and is presumably going to be out there.
And he's good.
Yeah, and he's good. And also the fact that they're likely going to be run heavy. When Antonio Pierce came in, they were 22nd. They ranked 22nd in pass rate. And then just between that and between the fact like it's Gardner Minshew at quarterback, Devontae Adams was second in the NFL in targets last year, just doesn't seem like there's a lot of food on the table to eat. I'm not sure Bowers is going to be the guy to get it.
And Jacoby Myers, by the way. Yeah. I mean, Jacoby Myers is there too. Like he had a nice year last year, so it love the talent, hate the landing spot. He's my tight end 13.
I think if you're drafting Bowers, you have to be basically betting on Devontae Adams to be traded at the deadline, and Bowers being a second half of the season player. How early do you draft a tight end with that many different avenues? The next one, Cole Kmet here, Matthew. He comes in as tight end 16.
He's going around the same range as Pat Freiermuth, who was on my others receiving votes, by the way. Arthur Smith has in his 5 seasons as a head coach or offense coordinator, 4 of those 5 seasons, his teams have finished top 5 in tight end target share. Like, Freiermuth is not nearly as sexy as Brock Bowers. Give me Freiermuth over Brock Bowers all day, every day.
How about Cole Kmet in this Bears offense that is loaded up on pass catchers?
And that's the point, right? 3 straight seasons with at least a 17% target share for Kmet, but now they had Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, DeAndre Swift, right? Or they didn't add DJ Moore, but he's there too. Gerald Everett, who, I tell my daughters, find somebody who looks at you the way Shane Waldron looks at Gerald Everett. Like, there's too many mouths to feed for a tight end that was fairly volume dependent.
All day today, we are hosting our annual Roto World Draft Marathon. We're right in the middle of 10 hours of non-stop draft prep all the way until 8 p.m. tonight. Check out NBCSports.com/draft marathon for the full schedule and all of our draft content. We're taking a quick break. When we're back, more love, hate, and the big reveal. Matthew's 2024 Ride or Die coming up after this. The Roto World Draft Guide is here for you during the peak of draft season, and this year it has added features available exclusively through a new partnership with Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life. Get a Fantasy Life Plus subscription and receive the Roto World Draft Guide to help you crush your competition. Use promo code ROTO10 for 10% off and unlock extensive fantasy, DFS, and betting tools. Now go to NBCSports.com/fantasylife to learn more. Love-hate continues with the quarterbacks. Anthony Richardson kicks us off here, Matthew. He comes in as QB6 for you. He's healthy, and he's ready to roll.
Small sample size, the king of small sample size, but what a small sample size it was. 35% of his team's rushes in the 2 full games that he played, 10 or more rushing attempts in both full games, had 20 or more fantasy points in both full games. By the way, the Colts ranked both first in both situation neutral pace and no huddle rate in the 4 starts that Richardson did. They didn't add much. It's him, Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman. We like A.D. Mitchell, we like Downs, but honestly, Richardson is going to run a lot and just, has had a strong camp. I know we had a bad practice against Cincinnati, but I'm ignoring that as well. To me, the Colts, I'm a big believer in Shane Steichen and what he did with Jalen Hurts, a former ride or die. So,
what he did with Gardner Minshew.
What he did with Gardner Minshew.
The team was one play away from winning the division.
That's
with
correct.
Gardner Minshew.
With Gardner Minshew.
Yeah.
Our next quarterback, Jordan Love, Jay, he comes in as a top 10 quarterback for Matthew, QB9, and what we saw, especially in the second half of last year from Love, was almost superstar status.
Yep, he played like an MVP in the second half of the season. He carried that into the playoffs until the second half of the Niners game, but a game and a half of excellent play in the playoffs before that. I think the sneaky thing with Love from a fantasy perspective is he does give you a little bit on the ground. Think back to that early season game against the Saints where he effectively beat them with his legs. He had 6 games with 20-plus rushing yards. The other thing, too, with Love is the fact that this pass-catching group is so young. It makes sense that they weren't clicking in the first half and they got better as the season went on. Should have added more health from Christian Watson. And he has 4 really good pass-catching options at receiver. So there are worlds where the Packers are the number 1 seed in the NFC and they have a top 3 offense in the league.
Second most red zone attempts, second most deep passes. And the fact is quietly he gets you points with his legs. 6 different games last year with 20 or more rushing yards. So, yeah, love me some Love.
And you also love you some Jayden Daniels, future Hall of Famer Jayden Daniels. He
multiple
comes in
Super Bowl winning
as QB10. We know what Daniels can do on the ground, Matthew, and just how explosive of a runner he is to match his deep throwing passing.
There were 5 quarterbacks last year who rushed for at least 400 yards. They combined to average 19.9 fantasy points per game, right? And so Jayden Daniels, who in his last 2 years at LSU when he was a starter for the Tigers down there, over 2,000 rushing yards, 21 rushing touchdowns. He's had a very, very strong camp. Cliff Kingsbury is going to have a fantasy-friendly offense. Remember, when Kyler Murray, his rookie year under Cliff Kingsbury, he was a top 10 fantasy quarterback. So, yeah, hail to the Commanders. I was about to say something, their old name. Hail the Commanders, hail victory. Jayden Daniels makes the love list. There's been a rookie quarterback for the Washington franchise that won a lot of people their fantasy leagues, a mobile quarterback.
Sam
RG3.
Howell.
Sam Howell. Yeah. Sam Howell was a top 10 fantasy quarterback last year.
Yeah.
And he won my team live at noon on the cock, the coveted titles.
Are you going to change the name?
Assholes.
Now?
Yeah, live at 3 on the cock.
Yes.
I guess.
It's an easy fix.
You could say live at noon Pacific.
9, yeah, there you go.
That's
live at noon PT.
Decisions.
We'll see. Because you don't want to change the name because I'm the defending champion.
Yeah,
you don't want to.
Right, that's why I asked.
Got to figure that out.
Kind of roll with
Yeah,
it.
I mean, we've already printed all the championship merch. Like all the fans have ordered it.
It's like when a player changes their number, but you
Yeah.
already have the jersey.
Yeah, exactly.
Problematic.
It's very upsetting.
Some others receiving votes, by the way.
Yeah, I might have to stay with the name.
Brock Purdy, QB 12. Trevor Lawrence sneaks into top 15 at QB 14. Kirk Cousins, QB 15. Jared Goff, QB 16. And Matthew Stafford at QB 18, Jay. When Stafford's cooking in this offense with Puka and Kupp, feels like he could have a stronger finish than that as well.
I think so. And look, the thing with really all of these guys is they don't give you a ton with their legs. Purdy, I don't know why he doesn't run a little bit more. He did in that playoff game against the Lions. It got them to the Super Bowl.
He's making like $7 a game right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Then he can start running.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that makes sense. To me, Stafford is interesting just because I think there is a chance the Rams could be a top 4, top 5 offense with Kupp healthier, second year with Puka Nacua, improved offensive line, added health for Stafford. Stafford was playing like a down ballot MVP candidate towards the end of last season. If he carries that over and they stay healthy, then he could be a top 10 QB.
Final 7 games of the season, Matthew Stafford was QB 9 in points per game last year, and he's going outside the top 20. Same with Kirk Cousins. We talked on the Draft Day Manifesto show about how we want quarterbacks that are mobile, and obviously Kirk Cousins is not, especially coming off the Achilles, but he's going outside the top 20. Like on an offense that's going to be pass heavy, playing in a dome with Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and Bijan Robinson. Like, it's just sort of ridiculous. We've talked a lot about Jared Goff and the indoor schedule as well. But to your point about Purdy, like, such a high floor. 8 different games last year with 20 or more fantasy points. Only Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts had more. So just such an incredibly high floor for Purdy. And even if he loses Brandon Ayuk, still think a big year's coming for Brock Purdy.
The other thing there is that he basically had a 3-game stretch where he was either getting concussed or playing concussed, I would say, in the middle of the season. The other thing is that just odds are that the Niners aren't going to be as dominant as they were last season, just natural regression. You're probably just on average not going to be a 1 seed. And there were just games where you just didn't have to throw in the second half because they were in such a commanding position. So he might need to air it out more. So there's scope for Purdy to do even more than he did last season.
We moved to the quarterback hate list, which is kicked off by C.J. Stroud. Still QB7 for you, Matthew. But right now he's being taken as a top 5 quarterback on Yahoo.
Look, this is the problem with the hate list. Like, if I thought about it in 1999 when I came up with the name, I probably would have chosen something a little bit less antagonistic.
I don't know if the lukewarm list
So
fits on
yeah, exactly.
SEO
But right,
the same.
it's when somebody's on the hate list, it doesn't mean I hate the player. It means I hate their ADP. And my concern with C.J. Stroud, as good as he is, and I think he's phenomenal. I think he's a baller, and I think he's going to have a monster year. My issue is where he's being drafted, right? He's being drafted as a top 5 fantasy quarterback, and he doesn't run. He doesn't run at all, right? So in essence, basically, over the last 2 seasons, every quarterback that finished top 5 in points per game had at least 240 rushing yards. Last year, C.J. Stroud had like 167. In fact, since 2020, there are only 2 quarterbacks in the entire NFL since 2020 who have finished top 5 in fantasy points per game with fewer than 240 rushing yards. Brady in 2021, he had over 5,300 passing yards and 43 touchdowns. Aaron Rodgers in 2020, 4,300 passing yards, 48 touchdowns. So my question is, it's like, if you think C.J. Stroud can get to like 45 touchdowns and 4,500 passing yards, then you should draft him as QB5. But I think those are really lofty numbers for a team that's more balanced on offense than you think, that has a good defense, so they're not going to be in shootouts. And as great as C.J. Stroud is, and yes, they added Stephon Diggs, the fact is that every defensive coordinator that faces the Texans this year has spent all offseason studying tape on C.J. Stroud. Last year, he came out of nowhere. So do I think he finishes as the top 10 fantasy quarterback? Of course I do. But just going to the top 5, ahead of guys like Richardson, ahead of guys like Kyler Murray, it's just like guys that can get you dual threat points, it's surprising to me.
Our next one, Tua Tagovailoa. Jay, this story with Tua, right? Being drafted as a top 12 quarterback. He's QB 17 for Matthew. The last 2 years, September through November, totally capable of starting quarterback in fantasy. After that, when you get to crunch time and then the playoffs, kind of falls off a cliff for you in fantasy.
Brutal ending stretch of the season as well for the Dolphins this year. They end the season having to play road games at the Jets and at Cleveland, which is rough. I think with Tua as well, so much of his production is tied to Tyreek Hill's production, and Tyreek Hill has been the best wide receiver in football across the past 2 years, averaging 1,750 yards a season. It's just unlikely that a guy who's 30 years old is going to do that again. So I think that with Tyreek falling off a little bit, with the fact that Tua falls off every year when he gets colder, just some uncertainty, and also the fact that he just doesn't run. You want that upside.
Also on the hate list here, Matthew, Justin Herbert.
We talked about Tua yesterday.
Yeah.
He comes in as QB 19 for you. He's being drafted right around there, but there's some injury questions here and also just some overall pass game questions as a whole.
If you're drafting Justin Herbert, you're literally banking on the fact, well, he's Justin Herbert.
Yes.
Right? Because there's nothing else to justify it. We know it's going to be a run-heavy offense.
Greg
right?
Roman.
It's Greg Roman. It's Jim Harbaugh. They have run, and they've run significantly throughout their years as play callers and head coaches in the NFL. Okay? Then you're like, okay, well, if he's going to – so he's not – is he going to run? Well, he's dealing with his plantar fasciitis. And while Justin Herbert is mobile, he's mobile in the Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence way. He's not Josh Allen. He's not Jalen Hurts. He's not Lamar Jackson. Right? But given the plantar fasciitis, you figured they're probably not going to run him as much. Right? This is somebody who got really banged up last year. And then you think about, obviously, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Gerald Everett, Austin Eckler moving on. So much of their production last year, 66% of their receptions, over 63% of the receiving yards, no longer on the team. Josh Palmer's the only guy there that has any kind of connection with Herbert. It's just run-heavy offense. It's just he's a big name, but I think he'll have small fantasy production this year relative to other players.
Before we get to the ride or die reveal, we do have some breaking news on the show from Adam
crazy.
Schefter, a very rare in-division trade. Your Commanders are sending Jahan Dotson, a first-round pick just 2 years ago, and a fifth-round pick with him to the Philadelphia Eagles in exchange for a 2025 third-rounder and 2 seventh-round picks. A quick stay for Dotson with Washington, who really fell out of place this summer. It just felt like it happened so quickly.
He had a bad camp.
He's
been having a bad camp for no.
Seemingly.
And once again, can we fire Ron Rivera again? I want to point out that the Commanders had a chance at Chris Olave and traded back with the Saints 2 spots to let the Saints go up and get Olave, so they could draft Jahan Dotson.
The Emmanuel Forbes pick didn't make up for it.
Emmanuel Forbes. Why couldn't they? Tell you what, we'll give you Jahan Dotson, but you got to take Emmanuel Forbes with you.
We'll drive.
I'm curious what your thoughts are here. So I think it'll be sort of outside of McLaurin. I think it'll be a bit of a wide receiver by committee. They've got Diami Brown there as well, but just a sleeper to keep your mind. A sleeper to keep an eye on. Luke McCaffrey.
Absolutely.
Love
Put him in the slot.
McCaffrey.
Put him in the slot. Let him catch everything. This is somebody that came into college as a quarterback and very late in his college career transitioned to wide receiver at Rice. Had a good Senior Bowl. Great hands. Good athlete. Tell me if you've heard that before from that family.
Yeah.
And Jayden Daniels and him have worked together a lot already.
Yeah, and I just think you watch the tape much
I took him in Dynasty and every Dynasty draft I had it because he was free. He was free at the end of the draft.
1,000%. I got him everywhere I could. People in my leagues know I'm a Commanders fan, so they screw me. But I'll just say this about Luke McCaffrey is that I also think his skill set and what he does well plays very well with what Jayden Daniels likes to do.
Right.
If you watch the tape of both those guys, again, you studied it closer than I do, but I just that would be the sleeper. And I think Jahan Dotson becomes a nice depth piece for the Eagles, but I can't imagine there's any fantasy value for him in Philadelphia as long as A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert are healthy.
We'll break down even more of this trade on tomorrow's show, but it's time, Matthew. The people have been waiting. The suggestions have flown in hour by hour. The big reveal.
Yep. So here's my question. Should I talk about what the finalists were and then I get to the reveal?
I would like to hear that.
Okay. I'll tell you who didn't. So we were cutting it down, but I have a finalist at every position. My finalist at quarterback was Jayden Daniels. I think he's going to have a monster year here, but I'm a little nervous at the fact that he just lost one of his better pass catchers in theory. So Jayden Daniels was on the short list. Not going to be it. Running back, Isiah Pacheco was on the short list. But again, look at his late season schedule. You know what I mean? Like, they play a couple of really tough teams in the fantasy playoffs. But I love Isiah Pacheco this year overall. At wide receiver, Drake London. Drake London was on the short list that we've talked about. But again, Drake London's never really done it before. You're banking on Kirk Cousins and Zach Robinson and his talent. And then Trey McBride was on the short list as well. But I thought, tight end. So I'll tell you where I'm going. Jay, and you hinted at this yesterday. Kyler Murray is my 2024 ride or die. Ladies and gentlemen,
Kyler Murray
drinks for free at the happy hour. He is my ride or die. He is my ride or die. I think, again, the point of a ride or die is somebody that I think is being undervalued. He's a known quantity, but when you talk about the top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL, people don't talk about Kyler Murray. Since he entered the NFL, this is a guy who's the 5th best quarterback in fantasy in a points per game season. 4 straight years finishing as a top 10 quarterback. Last year, he came back to a crap of a team that was completely beat up and still had over 17 fantasy points in 6 of 8 games. All 5 career seasons, he's averaging at least 30 rushing yards a game. Last year, 30% of his team's goal line carries as well. Now you add Marvin Harrison Jr., the emergence of Trey McBride. I love some Greg Dortch this year. Michael Wilson had some nice moments.
He's a good player.
I think it's going to be a bad defense as well, so they're constantly going to be in game script. So Kyler Murray, he's going on ESPN, he's going his QB 10. On Yahoo, he's going his QB 8. He's my QB 5. I have Kyler Murray as a top 5 fantasy quarterback, and more importantly, Kyler Murray is my 2024 ride or die. I already have a lot of Murray. I'm going to try to get Murray. By the way, you can get what I believe to be a top 5 fantasy quarterback late in your drafts. He's going 7th, 8th, 9th round.
Well, you just nuked his ADP. But
well, yes, in theory, at least at the moment you can. But I think there is, again, this is the same argument I made for Amon-Ra, same argument I made for Jalen Hurts. This guy is one of the elite players at his position, both in real life and fantasy, and he's not considered that way.
Yep.
This year, he changes everyone.
Yep.
And you mentioned him last year yesterday as comeback player of the year.
Yep, he's QB4 fantasy points per game in 2020, 2021. And we forget because the Cardinals have been so blah the past couple of years. Kyler Murray is the MVP favorite halfway through 2021. Yeah. So he has that type of upside. I think in this offense, we mentioned it before, like the Cardinals win total on DraftKings, 6.5 minus 150 to the over. So he's going to be in game scripts where he has to throw, he has to produce. And also I just think, kind of statistically, yes, but more just like anecdotally with the eye test. I thought at the end of last season, he looked better than he had at any point since that first half of 2021. So there's a lot of upside for Kyler. I think he'll have a massive year.
They didn't rush him back because they knew where the franchise stood at that moment, and that's why.
A lot of just good stories as well out of camp, like Kyler, new man, more of a leader now. Just a lot of good vibes around.
Well, they got rid of all the people that were like, throwing him under the bus, like the whole Call of Duty thing, which was such a stupid story to begin with. And
every NFL player plays video games, by the way.
Yeah,
every NFL player.
Every NFL player plays
Cliff
video
Kingsbury
games,
went to your team instead.
Yes.
Yeah.
Via Kotow in Thailand.
Yes.
But you know what? Yeah, so Kyler Murray's a bit of a departure. He's an older player. He's probably the oldest ride or die I've ever had. It really went down to the wire between Kyler and Isiah Pacheco. They were both there. And honestly, it was just when I looked at Isiah Pacheco's end of the season schedule, that was what tipped it in favor of Kyler Murray. But Pacheco's going to have a monster year. Make no mistake. Pacheco's a top 10 fantasy running back. But Kyler Murray, brother, you are my fantasy ride or die. I am going to the mat with you. Let's go, Kyler Murray. Go Cardinals.
Fantasy football just got better this season, $1 million better. Creator, join a private Yahoo Fantasy League and enter the $1 million NBC sweepstakes. Plus, earn extra entries to win. When players on your roster score a touchdown during an opening weekend game on NBC or Peacock, download the redesigned Yahoo Fantasy app or go to NBCSports.com/FantasyMillion to learn more. We're taking one more break. When we're back, though, of course, courtesy of our friends at DraftKings, we're looking at some of our best bets for Matthew's ride or die, Kyler Murray, coming right up. DraftKings Sportsbook is the #1 place to bet touchdowns, and new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets instantly, plus get 1 month of NFL Plus Premium. Download the app and use promo code BERRY when you sign up. DraftKings Sportsbook, the crown is yours. Courtesy of our friends at DraftKings, for last call, we're going to take a look at some lines for the 2024 ride or die for Matthew and Kyler Murray. Matthew, what stands out to you here?
That passing yards number, 3,400 and a half? Okay, so every season where he's played at least 14 or more games, he's never had less than 3,700. So, I mean, that line is basically saying, oh, we think he's getting hurt. I mean, which is, sort of insane. Like, he's had at least 3,700 passing yards in every season where he's played at least 14 games, and now he just added Marvin Harrison Jr. This makes no sense to me, Jay.
He's set 200 yards higher than Bryce Young, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Feels like there should be 500 yards
difference. Did they just group the quarterbacks under 6 feet tall?
Do they not know he's my ride or die? What's going on, DraftKings?
21.5 passing touchdowns, by the way, Matthew, matches your exact thought. That's why I'm going over on that.
Yeah,
when he plays 14 games, he throws for over that by a good margin. And I think the Marvin Harrison Jr. effect can't be overstated.
No.
This guy is a red zone monster. Like, I would write it in ink as a rookie wide receiver. This is dangerous to say, but 10 touchdowns.
Yep.
So I think we could find some for Trey McBride.
Yeah, sure.
Greg Dortch.
Yeah,
I'll go over on passing touchdowns.
Yep. Well, my best bet, and I'm glad that we're tied together with this now, Matthew. Mm-hmm. My comeback player of the year is Kyler Murray at 28-1. So this is like if you chose last year DeMar Hamlin as your ride or die.
Right,
now we get to ride with it together. So I just think that is the.
You won't be let down.
I think he should be the third favorite. I think Rodgers and Cousins should be the top two. I think Kyler should be third, and he's distant way down the board. So Kyler Murray, comeback player of the year.
I like it. I like it a lot. I'm gonna make me 4 for 4 on ride or dies. It's been a good run.
Okay,
been a good run.
Early.
So, we'll see. Like, a lot to live up to because Amon-Ra was huge, wide receiver 3 last year. Jalen Hurts, wide receiver 1 2 years ago. But Kyler Murray, top 5 fantasy quarterback this year. I'm calling my shot. He's my 2024 ride or die. It's closing time, boys. It means you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. So for Connor Rogers, for Jay Croucher,
nicely done.
And for my ride or die, Kyler Murray, I am merely Matthew Berry. We will see you tomorrow. Peace out.
Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and RotoWorld.com, and I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched, or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest RotoWorld fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.